Alrighty. Hello, everyone. Nice to see you trickling back in. We'll just give a moment for everyone to come into the room. Sorry, we're a little bit late, just making sure that all of our panelists are here and ready to go. Thanks for your patience. So for those of you who are joining us again, welcome back after our first session of Lab to Land today. And for those of you who may be joining us for the first time, welcome to Lab to Land. We are talking about advancing water and soil research for agricultural resilience here in British Columbia. My name's Asha. I'm a project coordinator with ACARN, and I'm joining you today from the unceded ancestral territory of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. And just up on the screen here, we've got a smattering of responses from this morning from some of the places that our participants are joining us from. And as I said yesterday, for those of you who were here, it's really one of the strengths of this workshop is that we're able to bring people together, not only from around the territories of British Columbia, but also across Canada and internationally. So welcome. I'm really happy to dive into this session, which is a panel on farmer-led soil research for climate adaptation and mitigation. So we've got a range of projects, including the BC Living Lab, the On-Farm Demonstration Research Program, the Soil Health Assessment Pilot, and the Salish Sea Regenerative Farm Society. But before we get into that, I'd just love to launch a poll and see who is joining us in the room today. On this panel, we have people who wear many hats. I know you all wear many hats, but we are interested to know who is joining us today. Perfect. All right, so taking us through this session, I'm really excited to introduce Dr. Jessica Chartis, who will be our moderator. Jessica is a postdoctoral scholar with 10 years experience driving multi-stakeholder collaborations and participatory research projects between academia, nonprofits, government agencies, and industry. She most recently hails from UC Davis, where her research focused on the long-term impacts of agricultural management on soil health and the provision of ecosystem services. And currently, she's continuing this work as the research manager at the Center for Sustainable Food Systems at UBC Farm. So I'd like to give a warm welcome to Jessica. Thanks so much for taking us through. Jessica will be introducing our esteemed panelists this morning.
Thank you so much, Asha, and it's nice to see a few familiar faces and meet the rest of you. I will go ahead and introduce the panelists now, and they'll share a little bit about their individual projects, and then we'll kind of dive into to the broader conversation. And so starting it off, Jesse MacDonald, and I guess will it advance to his slide first, or? So Jesse is a biologist with 16 years experience with Agriculture and Agrifood Canada. He's currently Summerlin's Knowledge and Technology Transfer Officer. His peer-reviewed publications span across the disciplines of fungal pathology, virology, entomology, and physiology and horticultural commodities. He sits on a number of industry research and extension committees and leadership groups and is the current president for the Professional Pest Management Association of BC and the Canadian Phytopathological Society BC chapter. His roles also include science coordinator for the Peace Region's Living Lab and the BC Living Lab within the Government of Canada's flagship Agricultural Climate Solutions program.
Hello, sorry. Yeah, I'm Jesse MacDonald. I'm based out of the Summerland Research and Development Center. I've worked in the Agassiz Research Center on the coast and the Summerland one where I am now, which is where I was born and raised. I'm here today to talk about the BC and Peace Region Living Labs, which are 2 out of 15 living labs across Canada under the Agricultural Climate Solutions Project or initiative of the Government of Canada. It's a $2 billion 10-year commitment under natural climate solutions. So agricultural climate solutions is 800 million out of that 2 billion over 10 years. And living labs is 200 million out of that 800 million. over 10 years, over 15 living labs. So I'm involved in 2 of them. The BC Living Lab is about 35 producers and partner groups from Prince George South, and the Peace Region Living Lab spans northern British Columbia and northern Alberta, and that is about 56 producers and 9 applied research associations, as well as some other partner groups. The 3 main goals from the government of Canada side of these living labs are to sequester carbon, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and increase co-benefits to farms. From the farmer side, their objectives, although they overlap with the Government of Canada objectives, are quite diverse. Anything from building organic matter in the soil, which crosses over with carbon sequestration, to reducing nitrogen use or reducing nitrogen overuse, fixing nitrogen in the soil. We have farmers who would like to use cover crops to reduce sunburn on some of their fruit crops by reducing the reflectance, and disease, pest and disease issues. So although the farmers' objectives are quite diverse, our objective, they all overlap with the Government of Canada objectives, and that's what I'm here to talk about today. That's all I have for right now.
Sorry, I was somehow muted. Moving on to Marjo Dessureault, who's a professional agrologist located in Pemberton, British Columbia. Her work focuses on delivering integrated pest management research and environmental assessment services to farmers. She is the research director at ES Crop Consult, and through this work helps clients design research that will be meaningful to them and to the agricultural industry. And Marjo, if you want to go ahead and share a bit about your program.
Yes, thank you, Jessica, for the introduction. So yes, I'm the research director at ES Crop Consult. We provide integrated pest management and on-farm research services in the Lower Mainland and Sea to Sky area. Over the last 2 years, we've been involved in this on-farm demonstration research project. And I'm here to talk about this a little bit before we start the panel. Hopefully you can see my next slide. So what is this project, this on-farm demonstration research project? So it's part of the BC Ministry of Agriculture and Food regional extension program. So regional agrologists, namely Conley and Drew at the BC Ministry of Ag and ES Crop Consult, we work together and we work one-on-one with a number of farmers across in the Fraser Valley and Sea to Sky to support on-farm demonstration research. So what we do as part of this project is we work on one-on-one with producers. We create research manuals for them to be able to implement their research. And we share the research manuals with the industry at large for other producers that might be interested. We produce research summaries with research outcome from the projects. And so if you're interested in accessing that, it's on the Ministry of Agriculture and Food website on the South Coast page. We also host field days to further promote farmer-led research and on-farm research and share for the producers to share what they've learned. So the objectives are to promote and increase farmer-led research in BC, to support and accelerate the adoption of beneficial management practices, and mostly those that are related to soil health. Next slide. So who participates? So this is a farmer-led initiative. Again, we are prioritizing projects that are of direct benefit for the collaborators, but also for their industry. We prioritize projects that can be evaluated over a few years because we provide support for 2 to 3 years, and those that will have a positive environmental impact. Here we're really talking about prioritizing practices that have been sort of shown to have benefits using classic research. And then we're very much talking about farmer-led on-farm demonstration research where we test maybe a new practice alongside the standard practice for the farm. So if you want to get involved as a producer, just contact your regional agrologist or myself. Yeah, and the kind of support that we provide to the producers. So again, we create those research manuals that can be of benefit to the collaborator and also the industry, the research briefs. We help producers identify the research question and create it like a data collection plan. We provide financial incentive to participate, and we also provide data collection support. So the producer is very much involved. They do their own some of the data collection when it fits within their typical operational task, and then we provide data collection support outside of what's within their operational task. So things like soil samplings and things like that. So yep, this is on-farm demonstration project in a nutshell, and I'm looking forward for the conversations.
For that introduction to your program. And next, we're going to introduce Dr. Dieter Giesing, who is the Soil Management Specialist for the BC Ministry of Agriculture and Food and the Soils Instructor for the Agriculture Department at the University of the Fraser Valley. Dieter has worked in and around soils in the organic waste industry for over 30 years. Soils-related projects have ranged from lab work to field work in forest, urban, and agricultural settings. He's designed growing media for the horticultural industry, created erosion and sediment plans for construction sites, and designed and implemented water and fertility management plans both in and outside of Canada. So with that, I'll pass it off to you, Dr. Giesing.
Well, thank you very much, Jessica. Yeah, my name is Dieter Giesing, and I'm soil management specialist with the BC Ministry of Agriculture. Before I start, I want to acknowledge that I'm talking here from Abbotsford, which is located on the traditional and unceded territory of the Stolo people, the Sumas people, and the Matski. With this, I respect the long-standing relationship that Indigenous nations have to this land and relevant to our panel discussion here with their soil. I also want to mention that I'm presenting on behalf of a full team that is behind me or with me. That includes Elma Holmes, Amit Lassisi, and Greg Racken. And we literally through dices who will be on the panel. So maybe get started. We promote in the ministry through our programs a lot of best management practices, but it's pretty tough to gauge if those best management practices truly fulfill their promise to enhance soil health and carbon sequestration without having reliable metrics. So at the same time, there's quite a lot of soil and on-farm research going on in BC, but everybody is measuring a little bit different things, and often the results become at best part of a unpublished report. So unsurprisingly, we actually lack a solid, consistent on-farm and province-wide understanding of BC, of the state of BC soils and their carbon stocks, which would help to support decisions on-farm, regional, and also on regional and provincial level. So in response, in April 2024, the BC Selected Standing Committee on Agriculture, Fish and Food recommended the creation of soil health and carbon indicators, long-term monitoring, and a public data sharing system. These recommendations align also with advice from the Ministry's Advisory Group on Regenerative Agriculture with a Guelph statement, but also with the Senate's Committee on Agriculture and Forestry's recommendations. So prompted by those recommendations, our resource management team was tasked with the development of a list of indicators and standardized protocols for field and lab assessment. So we are facing a long list of potential indicators, and the first step was to triage those that are both meaningful for the growers, that are practical, relatively inexpensive, and yet scientifically robust. In a second step, We partnered with the BC Ministry of Environment's laboratory to further refine and test assessment methods, again with the emphasis on practicality and cost, because we hope that ultimately commercial labs also buy into that protocol. In the third step, we then hired 4 contractor crews to sample about 50 fields across 4 regions and various commodities, and we tested our field sampling protocol while collecting operational environmental data for each field that was sampled. This process offered participating farmers free soil sampling and then expert interpretation. As to date, we have received the feedback on the field sampling protocol and the operational and environmental data for the fields. We still await final results from the lab, which is somewhat held back by one of those indicators, namely the water retention. The next step will be the analysis of the data and the revision of the protocols based on the feedback received, and in summer there will be a second round of field sampling. So who can participate? Well, basically everybody who is doing field research. We ask really to use those suite of indicators to implement or integrate in your research that you're always doing. You will notice there's a big of overlap what you're already testing. What support does the program provide? Well, last year we provided for the growers free soil testing and also the interpretation. So, okay, well, that's my part. So I pass the baton over to you, Jessica, again.
Thank you so much, Dieter. Great to learn about that work. Next up, I'm going to introduce Peter Doig, who is co-principal and senior professional agrologist at Upland Agricultural Consulting. Peter has over 20 years of experience in industrial biochemistry, microbiology, crop production, and the development of bioproducts. Peter's managed teams of scientists, engineers, and farmers and collaborated with finance teams. He's passionate about systems-based thinking and project management, supports agritech startups, and has co-founded Rubicon Organics and contributed to the development of Salish soils and Origin organic farms. He has written organic cultivation standards, including for cannabis with the Fraser Valley Organic Producers Association, and his projects have received a number of sizable grants and awards. He holds a BS in biochemistry from the University of Guelph and a master's in bioresource engineering from UBC. So Peter, if you could take the stage.
Yeah, so my background is in biochemistry. I've taken a particular interest in microbial ecology, went on to do bioresource engineering at, oh, there we go. Thanks, Jessica. At UBC. I kind of take a systems approach to soil, treating it, the microbial process is the nutrient and the physical process is like a bioreactor. So for this particular project, have you been able, is that up there now? You shared the screen?
Can
Perfect.
folks see?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, if you actually go back up, Jessica, to the first slide. So this particular project was a combination of Upland Agricultural Consulting, which is our company. We work with a bunch of different Indigenous communities around the province in Yukon. Salish Soils, which is the composting facility owned by Seashell Nation entrepreneur and my partner, Aaron Joe. And basically, we started off with land that was underneath the hydro lines, BC Hydro right away, right next, like on Salish, on Seashell Nation property right adjacent to the hospital. If you go to the next slide, Jessica, thanks. So there's barren land. It was covered with invasives. So lots of Scotch broom, ivy, Himalayan blackberry, etc. In 2022, we cleared the land. And because we have this composting facility next door, we had this great opportunity to take this land and farm it. Food security on the Sunshine Coast is, well, fairly dire situation. It's now the highest cost of living in BC. We produce less than probably 2% of the entire food consumed here. So the first goal is increase the production of locally grown food for the nation and other institutions such as the hospital, the school district, the food bank. And then to develop a sustainable agricultural business on this small property. It's 6 acres in total, and create local jobs and skills training opportunities. And then by virtue of taking the residuals from the region, the food waste, the forestry residuals, and yard waste, to compost and crop to sequester carbon. Next slide, please. I'll go through this pretty quickly, but it was essentially when we scraped back the invasives, we found glacial till deposit. By the application of Sailor Soils compost, we actually didn't use the finished compost. We actually used the overs, the stuff that we screened out. We ground that up and then we applied it. So it's the waste of the waste of the waste that we applied to the soil. We cover cropped it, shallow tilled it in, and then we began our cropping model. So Jessica, we can probably jump through these slides pretty quick, but I'll show you before and after. So this is after we've cleared the invasives. Next slide, please. And you see a cover crop coming in here, starting to green up. In the next slide. And this is our little till of the cover crop in. Next slide, please. And so this first row, I did myself with a shovel to show people how to do it, but we staked it out, and that's what the soil looks like. Next slide. So this is next slide is an aerial after we've greened it up and we've planted our potatoes and carrots and cucumbers, tomatoes, et cetera, et cetera. Wow. That shot is taken from a friend's floodplain. Oh, I just lost my screen here because somebody was calling me. Well,
I may continue to advance in the interest of
yeah,
time.
go for it. Go through the slides. I've actually lost. Someone's calling me in. I'm on a foreign laptop. I've lost my screen.
We can still hear and see you though, Peter, so.
Okay.
And we're showing these beautiful images.
Okay,
which,
perfect. Yeah, just slide through and then we'll just
and we've landed on this last one that has kind of a map of the entire ecosystem you're building there.
Yeah, cool.
The vision for the future. Very cool. Any last comments there, Peter, or shall we jump into a little context setting and some Q&A?
Next one. We're good. Thanks, Jessica.
All right. Thank you all so much. I am gonna, like I said, just give a little context setting before we jump into Q&A, kind of tying together the sort of through line between all of these incredible projects that you all just heard about. Just want to really center in on the importance of a participatory approach in the way we really seek to drive adoption of these sort of conservation, soil health, regenerative, climate smart management practices that folks are so interested in today. Obviously, there are challenges when it comes to determining the practices that one will implement to achieve the principles of these different approaches to agriculture. And those practices and really the exact implementation of those practices are going to vary region to region, across microclimates, soil types, different production systems, different sociocultural contexts. And so while we might all kind of be able to align and come together around soil health or conservation agriculture or climate, which creates a challenge in kind of scaling the findings that we get from long-term or controlled research stations to practical, commercial farming operations. In addition to like what practices to implement and how to implement them, there's the question of outcomes. Those are also going to vary place to place and region to region. And even the resource concerns that drive the interest in achieving those outcomes are going to vary. And so it's really important that we start to emphasize a participatory approach. And what that looks like in agriculture is this kind of what we're together here today around is farmer-led research. So really this continual ongoing process of planning, action, reflection, adaptive management, so to speak, bringing in together the multiple local stakeholders, engaging them at the onset and throughout the process, so that they're, rather than being mere subjects of the research, they're active participants. This allows for more context-specific research, again, that can answer these questions that vary from place to place and production system to production system, and can ensure that the research is tailored to the needs of that community. This helps to build capacity and empower the local stakeholders, allows for the development of things like communities of practice that can really continue in perpetuity beyond the length of the actual research project to share learnings, what's working, what's not, and drive us all forward a lot faster. Generally, this also is found to lead to it's considered to be more action oriented and lead to more locally appropriate shovel ready innovations that are more, not only more adoptable, but the adoption is more durable. It's more long lasting. The other side of that farmer-led research is on-farm demonstration. So really sharing those learnings and, like I said, developing these communities of practice, bringing people together to learn from each other. What we're doing, just as a quick plug for the Center for Sustainable Food Systems and the UBC Farm, we have a great project that's supported by the Organic Science Cluster called the Regenerative Climate Resilient Vegetable Project. It's a 4-year collaboration between the Sustainable Agriculture Landscapes Lab, the Center for Sustainable Food Systems, and a number of organically managed vegetable farms across British Columbia. And we're using what's called a parent-child approach, or in the literature, it's called a mother-baby trial. This was pioneered by a woman named Siglin Snap. And it really is this idea of creating kind of a hub and a network model of having, your controlled research sites, but then also these satellite sites on farm that are able to be a little more innovative and tweak the implementation a little bit more, that are more dynamic and responsive to the realities of agriculture. But then you still have those kind of rooted, controlled, long-term experiments that, for instance, the universities can support with, that kind of, you get at different scales and different levels of sort of rigor in the research, and different levels of practical applicability, of course. So yeah, with that sort of stage setting, we're going to jump into some question and answers. We've got some sort of planned questions that we're going to propose to the panelists here to start, and then we'll kind of roll into a more community-sourced question and answer period. Just to start us off, I'm going to actually ask each of the panelists to just weigh in a little bit, expanding a little bit on the intro you provided, to just describe a little bit more about how the strategies or initiatives that your project is taking to advance research implementation and or demonstration of on-farm soil health, soil function, soil processes. You can kind of touch a little bit on maybe the successes you've seen and the challenges you faced in the process of implementing your programs. And we'll start with Jesse in the Living Labs.
Thanks, Jessica. You've kind of like hit every single point that we deal with within Living Labs. And so Living Labs, so the Peace Region Living Lab is led by the Peace Region Forage Seed Association, and the BC Living Lab is led by IAF. So they're industry-led projects. So although the initiative is Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, the projects themselves are industry-led. We as the researchers were invited to support those. So by industry, by the leads, we were invited back to the table to support the on-farm work, the innovation work with science. So it's innovation projects decided by farmers underneath those leaders, whatever they want to do on their farm that overlaps with the goals of the project. And then we're invited to come generate data on their farms based on whatever innovation they're trying. And so, as I mentioned earlier, virtually every single farmer has a different goal for their work. And what we're finding is that's one of the hurdles we'll come back to is, as researchers, you really want to replicate trials and control everything. But on a farm, you're implementing it over one large area. Generally, this isn't 100%, but generally it's one new practice is implemented over one big area, and you can't control it, you can't replicate it. And because it's a working farm, the farmer has to make their farmer management decisions, and that practice might not even be the same from year to year. They're tweaking things and changing things. That makes it difficult for a scientist to come to any solid conclusion on it. But what it does do is open up the door for a huge amount of observation that could lead into research projects. Usually we'll do research and then try and roll it out to industry or to farmers. This is kind of the opposite of that, where the farmer's doing the innovation, that when we're collecting data and coming up with questions, and then we will implement that into research. or tweak it into the farm and go forward until we have a solid research question. So it's kind of the opposite of what we would typically do, which requires a change in mindset for us. But it's really fun working on farmers' fields from our point of view and working with the farmers and having them kind of lead things. The biggest advantage of working this way is the networking that's happening. The BC Living Lab in particular is covering up a whole range of commodities that typically don't work together for many reasons at all. And so this has kind of pulled them together and forced them to work together for a common goal. And so we have farmers, we have industry stakeholders, we have programs kind of organizations, and then we have government, and we're collaborating. I'm collaborating with Dieter actually, for example, on like a seed guide for cover crops. That's a provincial initiative that is tying into our Living Lab stuff. So we're getting this really big network of people, farmers, government working together. And I think that's actually the biggest strength of doing this is you have farmers talking to farmers about innovations. It's different than a scientist talking to a farmer and telling a farmer to do something. There's a lot more trust farmer to farmer. And I think that those networks will last longer than this program will, which is really valuable.
Thank you so much, Jesse. Marjo, do you want to share a little of kind of your experience and the challenges and successes with the on-farm demo research program?
Yeah, so like to answer your question about our strategy to advance adoption and research in that field. Our strategy is really for it to be farmer-led. So I think Jesse mentioned that, but so to be farmer-led, so there's so many different BMPs that growers could adopt. And those have operational costs. So we are promoting and supporting an approach that will more objectively evaluate a BMP. So we're sort of promoting an approach that will allow for producers to answer the question, does this work on my farm? So taking an extra step, because again, so many BMPs they could adopt. Start small, set yourself up to know if this works for you. And if a producer can demonstrate that there's benefit, the benefits outweigh the cost, and if we are effectively sharing with the community, then that will increase adoption of those practices. So I think you mentioned, Jessica, locally appropriate and durable. So that's kind of what we're trying to do with these on-farm, farmer-led research projects.
Thank you so much, Marjo. Dieter, did you want to add some thoughts from the chat?
Well, much has been said, so I think my contribution is a little bit only incremental. So, but we have a different angle though from the ministry. So even though we would love to, we are more involved in the background, providing tools that hopefully help all around to succeed. And one tool is definitely that central part to create a common language. And that common language is what do we actually measure as a minimum, as I said that intro. And when it comes to on-farm farming, so one thing we always get back from growers is what do I have to measure and look for? And there are many things we can measure though, and some go to really length and expenses to measure things that probably not so relevant. So there is some service we want to provide to the growers, and they're really fundamental indicators that we proposed. And the other one is that once we start hopefully an adoption on a wide scale from all stakeholders, and Jesse mentioned that we're working now with Marjo, I worked recently with Peter, with Jess. The more stakeholders we have, the more we speak the same language, we start to build up a really relatively robust database. And while it will never replace that very site-specific application, it will be a much more substantial help for the grower. Where do I actually begin to look for, right? Because oftentimes when we get requests, what do I grow here? What do I do there? And that is within the growers, but also outside from ministry. How much carbon we have in the soil? We say we don't know, right? So the hope is that it won't happen overnight, but this is where we have that long-term vision. We keep on working together. We all chip into that information, and we benefit from each other's. And well, the challenges here is twofold. First of all, of course, we are ministry, we are government, and the access to farmers. There is, among some farmers, a certain hesitance to work with us for different reasons. So that's why we have people like Marjo or Peter who are working closely with the industry. But the other one is actually in the nature of the data and collection. We need to strike the balance. We want to work with all stakeholders. And now we strike the balance of something that is simple. So farmers, my experience, they want to have something they go out, maybe even a smartphone application, click, and it tells them what to do. It's not so easy. And then we have the mindset of researchers. They want to have really to the second digital, want to have many replication, want to have really solid data, which is cost prohibitive. That will never fly on the large scale. So we have to strike the balance, and the approach you brought up, Jessica, I think that is the ideal combination that, well, let the researchers do their really nitty-gritty research and turn on, and then let's see on the large scale, how can we learn? And then we feed back, so that working together can actually benefit both sides and kind of overcome that obstacle that we observe in terms of collecting data. So
Yeah, that was the nail on the head right there. Okay, Peter, I'll see if you have any other thoughts, and then actually, Dieter, you brought up a point that we'll roll into for the next question. So, Peter, go ahead.
Well, I agree with the value of everything that the panel has said, and in particular, Dieter, with respect to doing research that is, I would say, commercially applicable or appropriate. I've spent 20 years doing engineering science, so characterizing systems that are already running and trying to figure out ways to maximize productivity. A lot of the research that I've worked on, my experience has been putting out fires. So there's a pest out issue. Well, so that leads me to work with the producer to figure out what's the solution. Is it an entomopathic parasite? Is it a predator mite? Is it something like a chemical, certified organic spray? A lot of the innovation comes out of those kind of reactions, in my experience. The last little while, my research and development has been with people, and working with Indigenous communities and looking at what are the best revitalization methods for some of the areas that were managed and were farmed in these communities, and then what are some of the foods and what are some of the cultural reactions. So a bunch of my friends' parents were in residential schools, and they had to pick the food, they had to grow the food, but they couldn't eat the food. So one of the things that I kind of deal with, where's that in between? And it's a lot of discussion with elders and a lot of discussion with knowledge carriers in the communities to try to figure out how we can help, if we can help. So that's what I wanted to add.
No, that was great. And actually, now you and Dieter both hit on kind of the next question, which is really just about how your program is supporting the collaboration between diverse stakeholder groups, and really what if there's anything unique that you're doing that's really helping bring folks together. And yeah, Peter, to the extent that you could maybe speak to the differences and how, I know in your previous work you've worked a lot with other academics or engineers or what have you, other growers in general. If you've noticed any unique differences in how you approach collaboration with Indigenous communities. So maybe you could just pick us up and start us there, and if anyone has other things they'd like to add.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Jessica. Yeah, I've been living and working on the Sunshine Coast, so Seashell territory, or SWIA as it's called, for the last 20 years, kind of on and off doing my master's degree, but full-time we've been here for 15 years. Been really fortunate to be accepted in the community. One of the things that I've learned is pace. And when I first showed up here and I had these grandiose ideas, chief and council at the time in a presentation, we're like, okay. we'll think about it. And now 10 years later, coming back to that project and it's actually reality is kind of a dream come true. But it was a pace, it was the assumption that what I thought was best for the community or what I thought would help or was needed is not necessarily what is wanted. And then family. So I've done some seminar work around how to engage with, chief and council, elders, people. One of the considerations, a lot of these communities, there's 2 to 5 families that kind of are the main stakeholders. And there's family dynamics in the staff, in the nation office, for example. So it's a more holistic approach. And it's a more patient approach in my experience than the typical colonial model. Although we are trying to do what we perceive as good things, it's not always the interest in the community.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Does anyone else want to add anything in terms of how you're engaging diverse stakeholders or just bringing people to the table? Anything that's worked or hasn't worked?
Maybe I can add here something. So we have, at the get-go of that shop, we have tried to create something like a provincial soil working group as an advisory, let's say, committee, or as advisory as a council for the work we do. And we need to be the issue is that oftentimes you need that credit or that general recognition. If we can't, as a ministers, we can't just work on our own and don't get the feedback. The challenge here is to find a content or something that is really engaging everybody. We see that there is a general acknowledgement of the importance of that work, but when it comes to getting engaged, basically members, all stakeholders do have their, if you want, business, and they do have priorities, and those type of engagement sessions do take their time, right? So that is a really tricky to incentivize stakeholders to participate in those kind of consent finding sessions if there is no, let's say, immediate gratification afterwards, right? Because, well, you do have, in the end, have your own business you have to run after. And that needs a lot of persuasion force, right? To get them really buy in for a long-term commitment and into that vision.
Thank you so much. If anyone has other last comments they'd like to throw in on here, otherwise we're going to switch over to some of the participant-led questions. Any last words on that thread?
Just one quick thing.
Yeah,
one thing that we've written into the program is that workshops and on-farm demonstration are a requirement of the teams that are running it. So that's written right in, and they would have done that anyway, likely, but now they have to for sure do that. And what we found is that one of the best ways to get farmers and stakeholders that are not directly a part of our projects to attend these workshops is to tack it on to a bigger event the day before, the day after that they would likely be going to anyway. And that's been really, really good. You know, instead of doing 2 trips to 2 different events, they're doing 1 trip and hitting 2 events off there, or workshops, or whatever it is.
thank you for that additional context. I'm going to go a little out of order here because one of the questions kind of follows on this thread. So before we jump ship to a new topic, I'll just add that we have a question from Kanak Bhatti in Surrey asking, how do you reach farmers, or how do farmers reach you? Does the farmer, I think some of this was spoken to, but get funds to conduct research on their field? Is there any system developed for them to then sell the produce from those sites where the research is conducted, or where the data is collected? So if anyone has any additional comments to add there.
Well, maybe again, if anything, I mean, we are, as most on the panel are much more involved in the actual hands-on or on the ground research. But if somebody wants to reach us, we are a public entity, so many of our contacts are online anyways, but then also we have a network of regional ecologists, and some of them are really very much involved in those research projects. Then it depends really. In Surrey, we have one for Metro Vancouver, for example, for that participant. So this is a way you can reach out, and you will be surprised actually if you browse the BC website on their programs, marketing your products or things like that. There's a variety of programs out there. They can give you little bit support, even knowledge transfer events that where we share those that knowledge can be tapped into to facilitate actually the research findings. So those events that Jesse, for example, talked about, tagging on one other event could be partly financed by. So that helps. Those couple of dollars oftentimes covers those events, and that helps.
Excellent. Any additional thoughts there?
Yeah. So within Living Labs, it depends on the partner group whether the innovation or the BMP that a farmer wants to try is the cost is covered. Some farmers are doing it anyway, and they have been doing it for years, and this is a way to quantify some of the work that they've been doing. Others want to try something new, like a new cover crop or cover cropping in orchards, for example, which isn't really a standard practice, and so the seed was purchased. So it depends on the partner group that you're working with within Living Labs. But I mentioned that the Agricultural Climate Solutions was an $800 million program, and Living Labs was $200 million over 10 years. That other $800 million over 10 years has gone to something called OFCAF, which is the On-Farm Climate Adaptation Fund. And I believe in BC it's administered by IAF, that you can apply there to get funding to help you get over a financial hurdle to implement a BMP or a piece of equipment or a piece of infrastructure that will that will overlap with carbon sequestration, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, or co-benefits. And it's a big list of things that you can try. So I would go look there for funding. As far as selling the produce that we work with, the farms that we work with, they're doing it anyway. It's all a part of their farm operations. We're just tagging along, so it doesn't inhibit any of the sales of their produce.
Yeah, and I just might also mention, I noted the project that we're working on at the Center for Sustainable Food Systems. I'll throw my contact in the chat, but we do have funds for the implementation and of the research, and then also to develop nutrient management plans with the grower. And so if anyone's interested, we are still onboarding. We're looking for 5 farms in the Lower Mainland and 5 in the Kootenays to add to the current 5 farms that we have on Vancouver Island. So if anyone's interested or knows growers that are interested, my contact's there in the chat. Got a couple more.
I had one thing to add to that, Jessica. Sorry.
Yes,
Yeah,
please,
one
Jessica.
thing. No, it's cool. Just if you didn't catch that, Jesse was referring to IAF. Broad spectrum, there's many programs there. So go to the website. Farmland Advantage is ones that we actually administer. The other one is SRED, S-R-E-D. So if you're doing any R&D on your farm and it's in any way potentially compromising your production, you're doing experimental production, you can get a tax credit. So that's under CRA SRED.
Very cool. Thank you, Peter, for that. So there's a couple questions here about, specific contexts. I know we talked a little in the beginning about the variability across soil types, microclimates, and production systems. There's a question from Shmuel. I apologize if I'm pronouncing this wrong. Shmuel Yerushalmi asking, is it the experience of farmer-led initiative to support the development of effective local agriculture in conditions such as the desert or arid climates? Has there any experience with this group? I think we could expand that broadly just to think about, specific context, if you have any insights on how you kind of approach development of projects with unique resource constraints.
So the Okanagan Valley is a semi-arid desert. And this actually opens up a whole other discussion we won't get into about what is soil health. So like the soil around the Okanagan is healthy soil in its natural state, but it's not conducive to agriculture. So when we're talking about soil health, we're usually talking about making the soil better for whatever we want to grow. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're improving the soil. But yeah, we're working on cover cropping, reducing sun reflectance, reducing heat damage, increasing the organic matter to increase the water holding capacity of soil within our agricultural systems, all sorts of stuff. And we've actually got research that shows that just the fact that you're irrigating in a semi-arid area is sequestering a ton of carbon, a ton, and that's just the act of irrigating. So there's all sorts of interesting things around that. And we are working with farmers here directly.
Yeah, and if I can here expand a little bit on what Jesse said. So we are in responding to or finding farms to work with, or we are a little bit more responsive, right? We at that stage we don't really target. We need to find a project in that area and really trying to bend somebody's arm to participate. We are oftentimes happy. Is a certain category of farmers that are totally willing to cooperate and work with, and others are more hesitant. They're in the second, they come later on board when it's getting a little bit more interesting for them. So in the beginning, we work oftentimes always with the same farmers and growers. That is a certain list, and we absolutely. And this is go a little bit away from that sharp project, but when we work with cover cropping as a beneficial practice, we know that the challenges you have here in the lower mainland are totally different ones than you have in the north, let alone the species that grow and don't grow and the operations. So there is no one cookie cutter approach, and that is where the beautifully this on-farm research comes in, because we all know that is actually just academically BC is a nice playground because we have that multitude of microclimates. We can have some general rules of things that work or not, but again, here's the importance to work together, because there's no it's not necessary we do the same mistakes again. If we know that the farm in an area has a couple of cover crops that never came up or they're never established, chances are that the same happens on your own farm if she or he lives just a few miles down the road. Not necessary, but I think we can actually exclude from the start. So this is where I see that if we have a network of all those on farm, and the denser we get, the better we hit the ground running when we establish new research.
Excellent, thank you so much. We do have a specific question here for Peter about the hydroline site. How was the land cleared of broom and blackberry? Was that done with the invasive green waste? And wondering if you have any advice for going about that in a cost-effective manner.
Yes, that's a challenge. Having a composting facility that does 20,000 cubic yards of compost a year, less than a kilometer down the road, the dirt road, is definitely an advantage. Trucks and hands and excavator, dozer, again, our friends, our community, our equipment operators. So all of this was done in kind as volunteers. So, but yeah, Scotch broom, like I've tied a rope up to the back of my pickup truck before and like had to haul it out by the roots because it's pretty invasive. So I don't know what more cost-effective way there is than to get in some heavy equipment and get a bunch of volunteers.
And while you have the mic, Peter, Thomas Odell was wondering what your plan is for the orchard in terms of management practices. If you have a few, and then we'll have just a moment for everyone to be able to say their last words. So Peter, I'll let you tackle that one.
Lots of proactive integrated pest management, netting, for example. We have bears, we've got coyotes, we have deer, and crows. Those are the kind of our worst enemies. So we'll have an integrated approach, and we plan on doing like a food forest. So we're actually heading up Jervis Inlet with some elders to take cuttings off of some of the traditional food forests, and we're going to be doing grafting. It's going to be very much a demonstration, but also producing orchard food for the community as well.
Excellent, thank you. We are getting to the end here. I did want to note, Marjo, someone asked for research briefs. So if you have a location you can point folks to, we can share it out. If you can respond to everyone, that's great. If not, send it to me and I'll pass it along. Anyone have any sort of final comments that they'd like to share? Key takeaways you'd like folks to walk away from this with? We'll do a round. Whoever wants to start can jump in.
Yeah, thank you for having us. I just would like to say that even if you aren't directly involved in any of these projects or initiatives, if you get wind of a workshop or an on-farm event, or there's something else that's happening, those networking events are really they're the key to everything. They're the key. Dieter referenced early adopters and people waiting till later. There's something called a knowledge chasm on the adoption curve, where to bridge from the early adopters to the mainstream is really difficult. But if you have farmers talking to farmers, that chasm gets a lot smaller. So, and you'll have ideas too, ideas and thoughts. So everybody can be a part of it, even if you're not hosting.
Any others? I may just ask, so we did get a question from Reg Witten and then followed up to say he'd love a brief response. If the organizers feel we have time, we could quickly see if anyone wants to jump in on this one. I'm not hearing any objections. So he says, I'd be interested in hearing how the panelists would look at an applied research approach or design on wildfire impacted foodscapes to achieve both watershed restoration and food security objectives beyond the individual farm focus. So thinking really at the landscape scale. It's a really great question and a complex one, but if anyone feels equipped to kind of tackle that briefly here, it would be a really nice application of the things we're talking about here.
I can provide I'll provide a very quick answer and then I'll let others jump in. But there is a round of Living Labs prior to this one, which has those 3 objectives I mentioned. But the previous round, the industry groups that were leading it got to choose what they were working on. And a number of them were focused on water quality in their particular water basins. And that was the Living Lab covered that water basin drainage. And so there is opportunity for that. There is an ability to do that. Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you for jumping in on that, Jesse. I didn't want to ignore it. It was such a good question, Reg, and I know we're limited on time. I hope I haven't set us off in terms of the broader timeline. Thank you to all the incredible panelists for sharing your thoughts, for sharing your experiences. Thank you to BC Acorn for organizing this and to all of you for joining us today. It was really a pleasure to spend some of the afternoon with you, or the morning, I guess, still. Thanks all.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jessica. And thanks again to all of our panelists. I'm always taken how, we come to this work as soil scientists and then find ourselves as anthropologists and facilitators and relationship builders, which, as we talked about in this morning's session, soil does really bring us all together across many human experiences. So you've all illustrated that really well. Perfect. So we are heading into our next session of Lab to Land at 11:30 a.m. You will need a different Zoom link for that meeting because it's in meeting mode, and this will just allow all of us to kind of have more of a discussion across attendees, a great place to meet people as well. And I'll also note that when you do close this session, a feedback form should pop up, and we really appreciate you taking just a minute to fill that out because it helps us improve our offerings and really, try to serve you better in our future work. But overall, thanks so much for joining us. I hope that you can continue with us into the next session, where we'll be hearing from Dr. Miranda Hart on bringing soil biology testing on farm and some of the expectations we can have for improving soil biological health through management. So again, thanks everyone, and we'll see you in the next session. We'll just drop the Zoom link again in the chat for that, as it is a different link. Thanks, everybody.